Have you ever been in a conversation and felt like you were missing some crucial context? Like everybody else was on the same page and you were still trying to find the right chapter? There's a reason this happens, and it's called the cognitive bottleneck. This is like a mental traffic jam that happens when our brains are trying to process information too quickly or without enough background. But what if I told you there was a way to bypass this bottleneck, a technique to make any idea, no matter how convoluted, feel intuitive? It's called the Feynman Technique, and it's about to change the way you communicate. Before we dive into the steps of the technique, however, let's talk a little more about the cognitive bottleneck. Picture this. You're at a dinner party and the conversation is flowing, but as you try to follow along, you realize you're missing a lot of the references and inside jokes. It's not that the topics are necessarily complex, it's just that everyone else seems to have a shared context that you don't have. That's the cognitive bottleneck in action. It's the mental speed bump that can make even simple ideas difficult to process if they're presented without the right amount of information and context. So, why does this happen? A lot of it has to do with something called the empathy gap. When we're communicating, it's easy to assume that what's clear to us is also clear to the people we're speaking with. That's the empathy gap in action. This is the difficulty we have in putting ourselves in somebody else's mental shoes. We might think we're being straightforward and that what we're saying is obvious, but to somebody else, it can feel like we're skipping important steps or we're jumping around or our thoughts are jumbled. That's where we need to practice some techniques to really step up the clarity of our communication. One person who understood this idea better than most was Richard Feynman, a Nobel Prize-winning physicist who was famous for his ability to distill complex concepts and communicate them in a way that everyone could understand. Feynman developed a three-step approach to breaking down a complicated idea and figuring out how to communicate it to somebody else. It starts with simplifying the idea down to its core elements and then figuring out how to connect it to things your listener already knows about and then getting feedback on what they're understanding and what they're not understanding. Let's break these steps down in a little bit more detail. One of the key principles in effective communication is to simplify your message. It's about getting down to the core concepts. The idea is to take whatever concept you're trying to communicate and distill it down to its most essential components. Imagine you're trying to explain how your industry works to a smart middle schooler. What are the core ideas they need to understand? Who are the key characters in the situation? What are the fundamental forces at play here? By taking the time to really strip an idea down to its bare bones, you not only make it easier for someone else to understand, you also clarify your own understanding of what you're even talking about. But simplification is just the first step. To make an idea really relatable, you also have to connect it to things that your listener already understands. And that's where Feynman's second step, analogy, comes in. Richard Feynman was a master at analogies. He had a knack for finding just the right comparison that would break open an idea for his listeners and make it understandable. He once explained the behavior of atoms by comparing them to balls on a pool table, by taking the complex behavior of quantum mechanics and applying it to something familiar like billiards. He made his students able to grasp the concepts behind what he was explaining. A good analogy is like a bridge from the familiar things that you already understand, connecting you to something new that you might not fully grasp yet. It allows you to enter into a new idea in a way that still feels grounded and still feels accessible. So that's simplification and analogies, which are the first two steps in the Feynman technique. And the third one is about teaching it to other people. There's an old saying in teaching that if you can't explain it simply, you don't understand it well enough. There's a lot of truth to that. When you try to explain something to someone else, it really starts to uncover the gaps in your own knowledge. The more familiar you are with something, the harder it is to understand the questions a novice might ask or the gaps in understanding that might come from someone who's just learning this for the first time. So by going through the process of trying to explain a complex idea to somebody else, you actually strengthen your own knowledge and ability to explain it in the future. So how can we apply these three steps to our own communication? Let's look at an example. Quantum computing is a complex topic, but we can make it more accessible by using the three steps of the Feynman technique. First, let's simplify. Quantum computing is just a way of processing information using the principles of quantum mechanics. Step two, let's use an analogy. Classical bits are like light switches. They're either on or off, but qubits are more like a dimmer switch. They can be on, they can be off, or they can be anywhere in between. This allows a quantum computer to perform calculations a lot faster than a typical computer would. Finally, step 3, let's teach it. Imagine explaining this to a curious 12-year-old. What questions would they have? What would they not understand? And there you have it. The art of explanation demystified. Whether you're trying to wrap your own head around a complex topic or share your knowledge with others, these 3 steps can be really helpful. Simplification, analogies, and teaching it to someone else. So next time you find yourself in a mental muddle, think about Richard Feynman. Break it down, connect it to something you know, and explain it to someone else. You might be surprised at how quickly the pieces fall into place. If you found this explainer helpful, please give it a like and subscribe for more insights into navigating the twists and turns of effective communication. Until next time, happy untangling.